Is your nose to the grindstone, taking care of all the things, your family, your marriage, building a business, or moving a project forward, driving momentum in your life and trying to get it all right? But maybe you feel like you've lost parts of yourself along the way or gotten caught up in the motions, but not sure the motion is headed in the right direction. May this conversation be a gift for you today. The same held true for Michele Nevarez back in 2013 when we first met and worked together. Michele was one of my clients in my early days of coaching, and I am so excited and honored to share her with you today. Michele is the founder and CEO. She's the author of Beyond Emotional Intelligence, a guide to accessing your full potential. Michele's mission is to translate emotional intelligence from theory to a powerful and practical vehicle for changing your life and creating lasting habit change. This special woman has 25 plus years of corporate executive leadership experience and brings a breadth of in-depth study, education, spiritual philosophy, wisdom, and practice to everything she does. She has a heart of gold to benefit other humans, and we share so much in common with what we are here to teach. She works in her own life and equips others to be at their best as often as you can be for yourself and others, and to focus on the things that you have control and influence over. May this conversation land for you as it did for me. I felt so calm after talking to Michele. She has a gift for calming. And stay tuned to the end where she shares a simple, profound practice to settle your mind. I know you're going to love her as much as I do. I'm Carla Reeves, and this is Differently, the Lifepreneur podcast. I'm a hyperachiever turned lifepreneur, and after a decade of coaching ambitious leaders, I'm convinced we are far closer than we realize to what we deeply desire, and it's a willingness to do differently that can change everything. This podcast is for the everyday leader ambitious for a rich, out-of-the-box life. This is your weekly nudge and reminder to take a risk to build a life that is uniquely bold, authentic, and in alignment with your deepest values. Michele, it brings me such great joy to welcome you to Differently.
Thank you for having me, Carla. It's a real pleasure to be on your podcast. It's very exciting.
Yeah, so we go a long ways back. I think we discovered it was like 2013. So give the listeners a snapshot of who you are and where you are in your life today. And then we'll kind of go back to where our journey started.
Awesome. Thanks, Carla. So I'm the CEO of a company called Beyond EI, and we basically provide coaching and training on emotional intelligence and how to be skillful with all of our perceptions. And so it's been quite a journey to start this business. And we also train coaches. We certify coaches to become emotional intelligence coaches. And yeah, I mean, I worked in corporate for 25 years across different industries. I'm a mom of 4 kids. So I have a very rich landscape background, so to say. And I also have a big part of who I am that is about spirituality. And in this case, Buddhism. I practice Tibetan Buddhism and have been doing that since I was 20, and now I'm not 20. So,
and your kids, what ages are your kids? Just to give people a sense of that.
So now it's a test of my memory. No, I'm kidding. So my oldest son, Daniel, my 2 oldest sons are my stepchildren, but I raised them from when they were 9 and 5. And Daniel just turned 28 2 days ago.
Wow.
And David is 24. My daughter, Sonia, just turned 21, and my youngest, Dylan, just turned 17 and is now driving. So those are the ages of my kids, and Dylan's the only one who's still at home.
Yeah. And beyond emotional intelligence, when did you, how long has that been? How long have you been doing that?
Yeah, so, well, basically, the idea for Beyond DI began back in 2015 when I was still working as an administrator in a hospital setting in Wyoming. And so I moved to Massachusetts in 2016 to start this business venture. And I originally started it with a friend of mine, Hanuman Goleman, and his dad, Daniel Goleman, who is the father of emotional intelligence. And, we had a really good run for the first, 5 years, and the pandemic hit. And so lots of things, we created a lot of things together in those first years, including a coaching program and, an online EI training program. And so the way that we came together really was around the desire to democratize emotional intelligence, and specifically to take what is known about the field and bring it alive for people in a way that they could actually embody it. And so that's the work I've continued on with. And now we've each kind of figured out in that 5 years what we thrive at, what we enjoy. And so while Beyond EI recently rebranded from Goleman EI, and we've kind of gone off on our own track to really help people take these intellectual concepts and put them into play in their life with practices. That's sort of the vein that this work has taken for us. So, yeah, that's a bit of the history.
So beautiful. So I always want to know people's stories. So when did the spark start in you? And did you know as a young, is it surprising to you from if you look back as a young girl that you're doing what you're doing today, or were there little seeds even back then?
That's a great question. It's funny because I think what there were seeds for was my spiritual practice. It feels like I was born to be on the path I'm on spiritually. And for me, if I had to sum that up, it's just about benefiting other beings and being at your best as often as you can be for yourself and others, and really acting on what it is we have influence on in our own lives. And this idea of potential is a huge concept, but what does it really mean in real terms to live up to your potential? Hence the title of the book I wrote, which we'll talk about. So I see seeds from my childhood that led me to the most important experiences in my life. And the work I do in many ways is the expression of that, of how I move through the world in a way that allows me to support my family and to, meet the sort of basic living standards that we all need to meet, like have a home and food and things like that. But so it seems obvious to me in that way that I would be, living that part of my life out the way that I am. But there's been a lot that's been a surprise too, the things I could have never have guessed. Or, really, if somebody had told me, Michele, you're going to be doing these things, and these are some of the obstacles you're going to face, I'd have been like, oh my God, should I ever even try doing it?
Abort.
That's maybe what you don't know. Yeah, heads up. Oh, this poor girl doesn't know what's going to come her way.
For sure. And I love that you mentioned the surprises, because I think those are some of the best parts of the journey, right? So take us back into your journey when you and I met, and share some of the things that were happening at that time in your life. Because you and I both met in frame of mind coaching, right? Where I feel like that was a huge catalyst in both of our lives. And I'm so incredibly grateful for that. And I know you are too.
Yes, it was such a powerful, amazing time that truly has led now to everything I'm doing. So I guess I had been in corporate life a really long time by that point, and I was really tired. I was really burnt out. And this was when my kids were littler too. And I think that adds to that feeling of carrying so much, right? And so I knew I needed a shift, and I met Kim at the SHRM conference in Chicago that year. in 2013, and I saw her talk, and I'm like, yes, this is what I need to do. And I think it was just so much resonated because of my Buddhist philosophy background and meditation, and so much of what she was intuitively saying and designing her program to be spoke to me. And so that's really where we became connected, you and I, right? It's where you and I were introduced, and I knew I wanted to go through her certification program. And as you know, the first step of that is getting coached. And so I had never been coached. And I do still remember I was on a business trip for the company I was working for at the time, Banner Health. And it took me down to Arizona. Yeah, is that right?
Yeah,
that's where we met the first time.
I forgot that we met in person before we did coaching. Yes, I forgot about that. We did.
Yeah. So I know. So, and I always remember feeling so grateful that we were able to meet and, and do this work together, because it changed my life, truly. I still get really verklempt about it because it just was such important work for me. And I'm grateful to you, truly.
I got that. Thank you. So help us understand why that was so transformative for you. I think it's hard for people to know, when do you know you want to reach out and ask for this kind of support in your life? How did you know that?
I knew because I felt like I'd lost myself. I felt like I lost the threads of who Michele was. And I think that happens to us as humans at different parts in our lives. And I think about all the parents and moms and dads out there where, you have your nose to the grindstone trying to support your families, trying to improve your life, yourself, advance, in whatever forms you've been taught that should look like. And most of us, often have these very unconscious influences that drive the momentum of our lives. But then you wake up one day, and this is really what happened for me, and I just said, enough. This is not working anymore. I'm not happy. And I don't have... I think it was sort of reached this point of almost hopelessness of what's next? Because I don't find meaning in what I'm doing, And I think people often feel this way, and they don't know what their resources are, or don't have a sense intuitively what to do with that. And I feel very sad if somebody gets stuck there a long time. But the truth is, for me, coaching is what allowed me to dip into the pieces and ask the question, what do I really want? And because I couldn't answer that, I thought, oh my gosh, this is a perfect opportunity to figure it out. And that's what we did, right? And I wish everybody would have that opportunity at the right time when they are their own answer, but they really need someone to help them see that and to help give birth to that.
That's so beautiful. I really believe that. I've always felt like you're the expert on your life, and I get to be the guide that helps you clear all the crap that's in the way of you following that, right? There's an internal compass that is intentionally designed to guide your life. But there's just so much stuff in the way of that. And when you pull all of that away, the answers and the purpose and all of that starts to reveal itself.
So true.
So were there any, go ahead. Okay. So were there any moments in coaching, that was a long time ago, Michele, but were there any things that you specifically remember that would just help people to see what that actually looks and feels like? right? We all talk about coaching, but
Yeah.
I think for people who've never done it, it's hard to it doesn't feel tangible.
Yeah. So, the short answer to that, and then I'll dive into some specific examples, is the book I just wrote. And, the 12 self-discoveries, Carla, by and large came out of, if not the exact coaching experience that we had together in terms of the insights and crystallizing that, along with myself having coached many, many, really hundreds of leaders over a course of 20 years, I started to see where people get stuck naturally. And I think initially I was able to see that most clearly through my own lens of doing the coaching work with you and in the frame of mind coaching model, both, and so what became the 12 self-discoveries, the topic of my book and the work that we do with clients and even how we teach coaches how to be coaches, each one has many stories. And even just going back to what we were just talking about, of this idea that you have the wherewithal, you have the answers within you, but so often we just don't see what we don't see. And it's as if we need to have that reflected back, and we need sort of a path back to ourselves. This idea of igniting your inner coach is really about finding that spark, what I call la chispa. And so, for us, I remember when we were working together, when I couldn't answer the basic question of what I really want, I'm like, oh my God. At first I was horrified. What do you mean I don't know what I want? And then I was so excited because I was like, oh, this is exciting, because now I get to figure out what I really want now, and to realize that could be different than what I wanted 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I think we're all like that as humans. We need these little tune-ups, and we need these opportunities to iterate and to grow into who we're becoming little by little. So, but I think for me, and I write about this right in the book, that, one of the most pivotal moments was realizing that, not seeing who I had become or how I was being experienced by other people, particularly my family, that they were getting the brunt of the me at not my best, and realizing that I needed to start prioritizing what was actually important to me, like the relationships with my children, and not necessarily focusing only on the things that weren't going well, right? But on the things that were going right, and loving them for all of the beauty that they are in their unique ways. And so that was a huge aha moment for me when you and I were coaching together, is it helped me see the delta between how my kids experience me and who I wanted to be as their mom. That was huge.
That, so often it's like, with the best of intentions, we as humans, we think we're doing all the right things, right? And I think that's where coaching for me in my life too has been so big, is that sometimes you just can't see. There are blind spots and you just can't see. You think you are doing all the right things, but when you kind of really look more deeply, the wires are all crossed of what we want and who we're being and how we're behaving. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts of having a coach in your life, is to be able to see that and to pull away some of those lenses, right? That shade and cloud our ability to show up really the way that we intend to and want to. Yeah.
Definitely, no doubt. And I think it's, always a gift to be able to see yourself through somebody else's eyes. And I remember also a huge part of my experience being that you were solidly in my court. The things I couldn't see about myself, you could see them and reflect them back until I could see them. Do you know what I mean? And
totally,
that's such a gift, because we become blind in many ways to the beauty of who we are and our own strengths. And, this idea that I talk about with the 12 self-discoveries around head trash, I think we let our head trash start to become our only vision of ourselves sometimes. It's the only window through which we experience ourselves. And it's not a very conducive window. And therefore, because we see ourselves perhaps in a way that isn't very charitable, then it's really hard, isn't it, to live up to your potential and to see your own worth and to see what you have to offer the world,
So it's so true. So in your work, like in what you're doing today, I'm curious about, because I see people, and, I walked through this myself, is like we can get so consumed by these other parts of our lives and our work, right, that derail us from honoring these deep, heartfelt commitments, like you said, to the relationships with your children or your spouse. And in your work, like, why do you think we do that? And how do you help people through that part?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, both experientially and I think for a lot of the people that we coach, it just crops up through habit. It crops up in a way that it's just upon us and we don't see it. And because because a lot of the work I do is looking at these topics through the lens of neuroscience and how the brain actually works. And because it isn't necessarily intuitive, we're not taught that. It's also evolved a lot. And so a lot of what I try to help my clients with, and also remind myself of, because I fall in all these same traps, is remembering that unless I show up with intentionality and some really specific objectives that I want to keep my eye on the ball of, it's easy to actually lose sight of them in the busy lives we lead. Like, there are just so many distractions coming in that it's all too easy to forget what's actually important. And so, for example, I talk about this thing called the awareness matrix, and it helps people understand what they actually have the capacity to be consciously aware of versus the things that are pre-conscious or autonomic. And so it attacks it from a very kind of practical standpoint of, hey, in the whole broad scheme of your life and who you are, here are the areas that you have the ability to influence. And so it's even just learning that then enables somebody to develop specific strategies and or reminders to do that.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the awareness matrix? Like what, maybe a couple of those things that people can maybe take into their day today and just begin to be more aware. Because I think that is the first step, is just being aware of what we actually have control over. Because I think you're right. So often we're trying to control all these other things in order to feel better inside or feel more peaceful, and it often just creates more aggravation and frustration, not only for ourselves, but for the people around us when we're trying to control them. And when you can come back to what are the things you actually have control over and start to control, put your attention on those things, it's a game changer. I mean, it is.
Yeah.
So tell us a couple things in that.
Sure. Absolutely. So, there are 4 quadrants in the awareness matrix, and we can kind of think about it as what's happening beneath the surface of our awareness and what's happening at least sort of above ground, so to say, where we have the capacity to be conscious and perceive these things. And so below the surface are things like our autonomic capacities, right? Thankfully, we don't have to remember when we breathe or blink. If so, our heart would have stopped beating a long time ago because we would have long forgotten about, oh yeah, I got to do this thing called beating my heart. And so thankfully, a lot of the functions are autonomic and built in. And Then the other quadrant that's below the surface would be what we would think of as the unconscious or subconscious. And I like to distinguish in my book, I talk about how subconscious really is, kind of the deeper we go versus, what do we just not have the capacity to be aware of versus what can we actually dip into, like, for example, our memories. We can call forth a memory, although for me it takes a little longer these days. I have to send for things. I'm like, hey, I'd like to remember this thing. And I send the elevator down. I'm like, it'll come up eventually. And it does, ding, and it's there. So, but anyway, so we have this whole class of things that we can't tap into as easily. And then above, kind of the surface of the things we have the capacity to be aware of, a big chunk of those falls into what I call the habitual zone, or the passively perceptive. And this is, if you think about it, what I like to say, the metabolically efficient way that our brains function. We chunk things out as habits so that we don't have to think about each of the things. It just takes more energy. But that's good and bad. It's good from a body standpoint, from an energy standpoint, but it's kind of bad if your habits aren't the ones you want to have. And so that's where I think being able to discern what's serving me and what isn't, and what habits have creeped up in my life that I need to revisit and kind of unwind and take back. And then finally, there's the conscious quadrant of the things that we are intentional about when we're fully present in the moment and in our lives. And so the idea is kind of shining the spotlight of our attention or our conscious awareness on the areas that we have the capacity to influence, right? The things above the surface. And even things like that start to dip into that bidirectional relationship between our brain and our body, what we think of as our capacity to feel bodily sensations and signals. We can build that, and that's helpful because that's an early warning signal for us that, hey, something's not right here. And if we're aware of what our bodies are telling us, and really what our emotions, like these precursors to emotions, are like the flashing signs, the billboards, when you're driving on a highway and it's like they want you to see something. This is our body's equivalent of saying, hey, wake up, pay attention.
Engine
maybe
light
it's
is
that
on.
feeling. Exactly. There you go. That's right. I love that metaphor. So that's, just sort of a lay of the land of the awareness matrix, and how it's just meant to be informative and instructive around, look, here's what you can influence. So focus your time here. Don't worry so much about the things that you can't influence. And that's not even attacking the whole class of things that don't have to do with us, right? Like other people, their emotions, their behaviors. Like, good luck. That's just going to be a really big waste of your time trying to control those things. So,
yeah, I spent half my life focused on the outer world, right? And it's so true when you come back to like what you're saying is we have all these faculties that are within our reach and within our control that can allow us to have really amazing influence over the quality and experience of our lives. And often we were not taught about it, we don't know about it, or we're just really disconnected from it. And just starting ever so small can make such a difference. So tell us a little bit about your book, and I want to read a little tiny piece from it. But tell everybody about your book and where they can find it.
Sure. It's called Beyond Emotional Intelligence, A Guide to Accessing Your Full Potential. And it was published last November by Wiley Publications. And it's available everywhere online. Interestingly enough, most books are not sold anymore in hard copy. It's definitely it's not the norm. And so you can order it anywhere, though, in hard copy, but online at all the major outlets. So the book came about, Carla, because Wiley reached out to me and asked if I'd write a book about the 12 self-discoveries and the work that I do. And me being who I am, said, yes, of course, this is great. I'd love to. And of course, I had to make it more difficult. Instead of just writing about the 12 self-discoveries as they are, I decided to tackle the science behind them, because I'd been asked so many times by the people going through our coaching program, well, how does this tie to science? And how does this? And I'm like, guys, I don't know. This is not how they came up. They came up through real life experience, So, but I felt they were good questions, and I am quite interested in how the brain works and the body and the mind. And so I chose to go deep with this and to really investigate the underpinnings of each and every one of them, with how they tie to perception and emotion and how those work at a bodily and psychological level.
How long did it take you to write this book? How long did it take
Carla,
you to write the book?
Hear you.
How long did it take you?
Yeah, so 6 months. I was given a very tight timeline, and it about killed me, actually. I had this whole sort of, I felt like every day was a bit of an out-of-body experience, because I had to write I was writing about really difficult topics. I had to do a lot of research, a lot of neuroscience research and cognitive behavioral research, and I read really literally just hundreds and hundreds of pages of research articles. And that was just a tip of the iceberg, right? So it was a very tall order, 6 months.
Wow. That's amazing. I just want to read. So it's chapter 4, you are the common denominator. And you say, where is the one place from which we cannot escape? Where do we spend the entirety of our lives? In this body and in this mind. Many of us go through our entire lives trapped in the confines of our own habitual ways of processing and making sense of what we perceive, not even realizing the role our interpretation of reality plays. Once we realize our own awareness is the exit strategy from an escape room of our own making, we start to catch glimpses of the invisible mental attitudes and constructs holding us hostage to those aspects of ourself we're not yet consciously aware of. That just strikes me always, because in all the years of my work, I just see that we have trapped ourselves in this prison that we forgot we had the key to. So speak to that a little bit.
You bet. Well, honestly, my first thought was, that's a long sentence. No, my editing head comes
so
in like,
funny, you're judging. Michele.
It's like, couldn't we have shortened that one up a bit?
Oh, it's beautiful.
So yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. And I'll use a metaphor, because I like metaphors. I think they convey a lot of deep information quickly and accessibly. And so I remember one time I was sitting in the house I lived in. I was renting when I first moved out here. I had to rent the first few years, and it was a beautiful place with an amazing view. And it had all these kind of vaulted ceilings, high windows. And I remember one day with both the doors open, looking out over the kind of the mountain scenery here in the Berkshires, where I live, and there was a fly stuck on the inside of, the window, looking out, trying to get out through this window. And I thought, wow, what a profound, metaphor for our condition as beings. Maybe not even just human beings, maybe all beings have this, where the doors open. It's right there. And I remember hey buddy, I was trying to talk him down, doors down a little. I know you keep at this window, you keep beating yourself against this window, but the door's just a little bit down and it's wide open and you can fly through it anytime. And so that's the metaphor of how our own awareness is our superpower. And if we can learn how to maneuver it, then all of these corners we think ourselves into or feel ourselves into don't have to be
That reminds me years and years and years ago, like one of my first coaching clients, I remember he had kind of this visual, well, I had this visual of him like literally inside of this like shack, like just pushing up the boards and like trying to nail up the boards and fix the house he's in. And then like there was this moment of like realizing that he could just walk out the door and like build something new and completely different, right? And it just totally brought that back. I hadn't thought about that in so long, but it's so true. It's so true. And I that's what excites me so much about this work is that we do have so much creative agency in our lives that we often don't realize. And so, okay. So is there anything else from the book that like a takeaway that you want to give to the listeners, or one of your principles, like anything you want to leave them with?
Yeah, I mean, I think you actually hit the essence of it in the quote. I really do. I think it's, we often just don't know how to get out of our own way, but with a little bit of concerted effort on our part to want to delve into what's keeping us stuck, whether that's through coaching or learning some practices that allow us to connect with, our own awareness and what gives us agency, or even, the element of how we make sense of reality, because that's another big area where we have agency. In other words, the brain curates the initial meaning and impression that it wants us to act on, right? It predicts based on prior experiences and our expectations. That's what it uses to make its calculated predictions of where we're going to need to step next or what we're going to need to say next, given the context. So even though our brain does all of that, and then it's almost as if we arrive on the scene, that's the feeling, and like, what have we here? Oh, look, Michelle's angry again, or here are these circumstances that I get a choice about. Will I take the bait? It's like, you see this kind of like in the novellas, the Spanish soap operas, or Mexican, depending on which novellas you watch. You might say, will Michelle take the bait here? If there were commentary. But so much of that comes down to, it turns out, the sense we make of our own perceptions and emotions, and then what we do with that. So for example, if I am in an everyday situation and I perceive and translate malintent or negative intent on the part of another towards me or my loved one or this, that, the other, that's going to lead to a different outcome than if I say, oh, I bet it's not personal at all. I bet they're having a bad day. I bet they may not know their impact. They may not know how they're coming off. They may be going through a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not aware of. And that changes not just how I react to them and their reality. It changes my reality. It changes how I feel in that moment and what I choose to focus on. And so that's a very practical example of how what we place and hold our attention on, and then the sense we choose to make of it, if we have the awareness to do so. That's the key. If we have the awareness to do so versus falling into habits, that's our power. That's our agency in a nutshell. So that's big news. That's good. That's like a good news thing.
Yes, it is. It is good news. So in the spirit of differently, like how, because that's like a moment of choice, right? Where you can do differently and you could change your world and somebody else's world. What is your most important practice in your life or tool in your life that helps you stay connected to the moment and that, that awareness to be able to make that choice?
Mm-hmm. Great question, Carla. So this is going to sound, well, however it's going to sound, but it's such a simple yet deeply profound practice. And again, it's what I use personally the most often. It's called the gentle sigh. And the gentle sigh is anytime you remember, because you're always breathing, presumably, while you're alive. So that's helpful. Breath in and of itself is a reminder. And so when I remember, whether it's because I get wound up or I see a train wreck coming, proverbially speaking, in my own head, or like my son, he's very funny, Dylan, he tells really funny stories, and he has a teacher of his who shall go unnamed, who he adores, okay? But sometimes this teacher gets really worked up, and so Dylan comes home with stories sometimes about this teacher. And he came home one day, he's like, yeah, and it was like there was a dumpster fire in his head, and we could all see it. And then he realized it, and then he calmed down. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so funny.
Wow.
So funny, and like to hear, but not to experience, right? So let's say you're having a dumpster fire moment in your own head.
So good.
So then you're just breathing normally, and the out breath, when you let that out breath out, just let it hang there before taking the next breath. Not abnormally, like don't turn blue in the face and fall over, but it's just a little longer. Fully exhale and drop everything. And when I say drop everything, I mean drop concepts, drop what you're feeling. Just let the mind settle itself. The mind has the capacity to settle itself, to be calm, to be spacious, to be clear, if we let it. And something about that gentle sigh allows us the space and the presence of mind when we drop everything to, for that moment, be in those qualities of who you really are.
I'm just going to soak in that all day. I love that. And I think that's the perfect place for us to kind of wrap. So tell people, where can they learn more about your coaching and what you're doing? And I know you've shared your book, but any places that people can follow what you're doing. You are such a gem, Michele. I could hang out with you all day, and I feel calmer just being in your presence, and I'm sure everybody else does too. But yes, where can they learn more about you and follow what you're doing?
Thanks, Carla. So we're doing a lot of exciting stuff right now at Beyond EI, and so the website is a great place to go to learn about the programs. And so it's beyondei.inc, INC. And so, that's a great place to go. And also, my email address is very similar to that. It's Michele with one L at beyondei.inc if you're interested in learning more about what we do. We work with companies and individuals and coaches, and have a really global audience too, which is really fun. So thank you so much, Carla, for having me and being in my life. I think you know how important you are to me.
Thank you, Michele. This was such a great conversation. I know it's going to touch people listening. It's touched me. And I just, I thank you for your time and your generous and kind heart.
Likewise, my dear.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Differently. I hope it stirred your thinking, and I invite you to take one inspired action from something that stood out to you. If you want to hear more conversations like this, hit follow on your favorite podcast app. And if this episode could impact someone you know, please share it and pass it along. Remember, new episodes drop weekly. See you next week.